In 16th century England, the world seemed divided by an immense chasm. It was a time when faith, once a living flame that warmed people's hearts, now separated them, generating unimaginable conflicts and suffering. Can you imagine what it must be like to hide your faith, to protect those who practice it in secret, knowing it could cost you your life? This is the backdrop of betrayal, persecution, and bravery, in which we find the story of Saint Margaret Clitherow, the woman who became known as the Pearl of York. England, once called the Island of Saints, was plunged into a spiritual storm. After King Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church, the country's religious landscape changed drastically. The Anglican Reformation brought a wave of persecution against those who refused to abandon the Catholic faith. Under the reign of Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's daughter, the situation grew even more intense. She not only prohibited the celebration of Mass, but also decreed that anyone who sheltered a Catholic priest would be guilty of treason. And treason in this context meant death. Pause for a moment and imagine living in a place where even the simple act of praying could land you in prison. This was the harsh reality Catholics faced in 16th century England. Yet amidst this darkness, some rose as true beacons of hope. Margaret Clitherow was one of them. She was born in 1556 in York, a historic city filled with narrow streets and walls that seemed to whisper secrets from the past. The city, with its magnificent York Minster, had long stood as a symbol of Catholic faith in England. But during Margaret's time, the bells that once called the faithful to Mass had fallen silent. Margaret grew up in an Anglican family. Her father, Thomas Middleton, was a prosperous wax merchant who adhered to England's official religion. But, as is often the case, God sometimes has unexpected plans. This was true for Margaret. At the age of 15, she married John Clitherow, a wealthy and respected butcher in York. John was Anglican, but he had a peaceful and understanding nature, allowing his wife the freedom she needed, something crucial for Margaret's spiritual journey. After her marriage, she began learning more about the Catholic faith. At first, it was mere curiosity, but as she heard stories of priests and lay people facing persecution for their beliefs, something within her shifted. Imagine this: a young woman, unable to read or write, driven by an unquenchable thirst for truth. Margaret converted to Catholicism 3 years into her marriage, and from that moment on, her life was forever changed. Unlike many who kept their faith hidden, Margaret became a central figure for York's small Catholic community. She turned her home into a place of refuge where priests could hide and celebrate clandestine masses. Don't think for a moment that this was easy. Every Mass was an act of defiance against the laws of the realm. Margaret knew that discovery could come at any time, but she refused to be intimidated. Now picture the scene: Margaret at dawn, kneeling in prayer while her children were still asleep. She knew that day could be her last, but her faith gave her strength. And it wasn't just that. She also taught her children to follow the same path. Her 2 sons, Henry and William, and her daughter Anne, grew up surrounded by their mother's love and the power of her faith. In fact, Henry was sent to the seminary in Douai, France, to become a priest, a decision that in itself was considered a crime by the crown. As the years went by, the laws against Catholics became even stricter. In 1585, Elizabeth I signed the Statute Act, making it high treason for any priest to be found on English soil. Margaret, rather than backing down, doubled her efforts. And it wasn't just courage, it was a deep conviction that she was doing the right thing. By the grace of God, all priests will be welcome in my home, she would say. But like any story of bravery, this one also had its moments of tension. The breaking point came in March 1586. Margaret's house was betrayed, and a raid ensued. The officers arrived unexpectedly and found a secret cupboard containing liturgical items, clear evidence of her involvement in the Catholic faith. She was arrested and brought to trial. This is where her courage shone even brighter. In court, Margaret refused to enter a formal plea. She knew that if there were a trial, her husband, children, and servants could be forced to testify against her, possibly under torture. So she said, "I have committed no crime and need no trial." Her stance enraged the judges, who decided to sentence her to death. The punishment was horrifying. She would be crushed to death by stones. When the day of her execution arrived, March 25th, 1586, Good Friday, Margaret remained calm. Pregnant with her fourth child, she faced her death with a courage that left everyone around her awestruck. The executioners hesitated, unwilling to carry out the task. In the end, beggars were hired to finish the job. Lying on a sharp rock with a door placed over her body and heavy stones piled on top, Margaret gave up her life. Before she died, she prayed for the Queen's conversion and for her family's perseverance in the faith. The impact of her death was so profound that even Elizabeth I, known for her coldness, reportedly expressed horror at the method of execution. Hypocrisy, perhaps. After all, it was under her orders that Margaret was martyred. But one thing is certain, Margaret Clitherow's faith and sacrifice echoed far beyond her time. How do you feel hearing this story? It's impossible not to admire someone with such courage. Margaret, the Pearl of York, was not just a martyr. She was a living example of how love for God can overcome even the greatest challenges. Her story continues to inspire us today, reminding us that true strength comes from within, from what we believe. Be honest. What would you be willing to sacrifice for your faith? Perhaps that's the question Saint Margaret leaves us with, and more than that, she gives us the answer, not with words, but with her life. Here are some interesting facts about Saint Margaret Clitherow that further highlight her life and legacy. Margaret was known for her charming and charitable personality. Her neighbors, friends, and even her servants held her in deep admiration. Despite being strict when correcting mistakes, she was greatly respected and beloved, which made her home a haven. For many, despite being illiterate early in life, Margaret learned to read and write while she was imprisoned. This demonstrates her determination and her desire to deepen her faith and knowledge, even in the most adverse circumstances. Local tradition holds that Margaret used the Black Swan Inn in Peasholm Green as a hiding place for persecuted priests. Strategically located in York, the inn became a safe haven where Margaret managed to protect many priests, even under the watchful eyes of the authorities. When her house was raided for the final time, the tip that led to her arrest came from a child who studied with her children. The child became frightened during the search and inadvertently revealed the secret hiding place where Margaret stored her liturgical items. Margaret was pregnant with her fourth child when she was martyred. The fact that she faced her execution, knowing she carried new life within her, makes her sacrifice even more poignant and heroic. After her death, Margaret's children followed in her footsteps. Henry and William became priests, and Anne dedicated her life to God as a nun, remaining faithful to the Catholic faith. When Queen Elizabeth I learned of Margaret's brutal execution, she sent a letter to the citizens of York expressing her horror. However, many viewed this as an attempt to save face, as the Queen herself was responsible for the laws that enforced religious persecution. Margaret was canonized by Pope Paul VI in 1970, along with other English Catholic martyrs. Her feast day is celebrated on March 25th, the day of her death, which is also the solemnity of the Annunciation of the Lord. The nickname Pearl of York was given to Margaret because of her purity, courage, and unwavering faith, qualities that made her a shining symbol of faith during a dark time. Margaret's life is not just an example of sacrifice, but also a testament to how an ordinary person with challenges and limitations can become extraordinary. Through faith and determination, the story of Saint Margaret Clitherow is, above all, a powerful invitation to reflect on the value of faith, courage, and loyalty to our deepest beliefs. It's impossible to learn about her journey without asking yourself, what would I do in her place? How would I respond if my faith were considered a crime? Margaret was an ordinary woman, much like countless others of her time. She had no formal education, did not seek greatness or fame, and her life could easily have gone unnoticed in history. But her unwavering faithfulness to God is what made her extraordinary. Margaret reminds us that sainthood is not reserved for priests, monks, or extraordinary individuals. It is within reach for anyone who chooses to live their faith with integrity and love, even in the face of hardship. What moves me most is how she managed to turn the small, everyday moments into great acts of faith. Opening her home to persecuted priests, teaching her children the Catholic faith, attending Mass in secret. These are actions that, on the surface, might seem simple, but required immense courage. Every choice Margaret made was a calculated risk, a conscious decision to place her faith above fear, and that is profoundly inspiring. There is something profoundly human in her story. Margaret was not immune to suffering. We must remember that she was a mother and a wife. Knowing that her actions could put her family in danger must have weighed heavily on her heart. Even so, she chose to protect her conscience and her faith above all else. It makes me reflect on the choices we make every day. How often do we shy away from acting on our beliefs out of fear of facing lesser consequences, like criticism or rejection? Margaret shows us that living our faith authentically requires sacrifices, but those sacrifices carry eternal significance. Another powerful lesson is the strength of her silent testimony. When she refused to defend herself in court, Margaret wasn't giving up on herself. She was protecting those she loved. Her refusal to undergo a trial was an act of dignity and love. Sometimes silence is the greatest form of resistance. It makes me think about how we face challenges today. Do we have the same wisdom to act with faith and courage without succumbing to despair or anger? Ultimately, Margaret's martyrdom reminds me that true faith always leaves a legacy. The strength of her belief wasn't something she carried alone. She passed it on to her children, who persevered in their faith, becoming priests and religious. Her courage echoed far beyond her earthly life, inspiring generations of Catholics during times of persecution. The story of Saint Margaret Clitherow is not just a tale from the past. It is a mirror that compels us to examine the present. Do we value the religious freedom we have today? Do we live our faith with the same intensity that she did, even without facing the same threats? If there's one thing her life teaches me, it's that faith only makes sense when it moves us to act. It's not enough to believe. We must live that belief in tangible ways, even if it challenges us to step out of our comfort zones. Like Margaret, we are called to bear witness, not with grand speeches, but with small acts of love and courage in our daily lives. And you? Have you ever thought about what you're willing to do to live your faith? Her story makes me ask myself that question, and I think it's a question we should all answer, not with words, but with our lives. Prayer to Saint Margaret Clitherow. O Saint Margaret Clitherow, faithful witness of God's love and courageous defender of the faith, you faced persecution, imprisonment, and even martyrdom to remain true to the truth and to protect priests and the Holy Mass. Teach us to live with the same courage and determination. Intercede for us before the Lord, so that in times of trial we may never stray from our faith and may bear witness to Christ's love through our lives. Help us to have the same confidence you had, even in the face of challenges and suffering. Grant us generous hearts to welcome others, strength to defend the truth, and humility to seek God's will in all things. Saint Margaret, loving mother and woman of unwavering faith, watch over our families and guide our steps so that we may walk the path of holiness. We pray that we, like you, may be light in times of darkness and hope in moments of despair, living each day for the greater glory of God. Amen. The story of Saint Margaret Clitherow is a powerful reminder of how courage and faith can shine even in the darkest moments. Her determination to defend the truth, even at the cost of her own life, inspires us all to live with greater purpose and loyalty to what we believe. Margaret was not just a martyr. She was an ordinary woman who, through her unshakable faith, became extraordinary. If you felt moved by this story, subscribe to the channel Journey of Saints Sacred Stories. Share this message of faith and inspiration with someone who needs courage today. And don't forget to leave a like. Now, we want to hear from you. What moment in Saint Margaret's life inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments. And before you go, take a moment to watch one of the videos suggested above. It was chosen just for you. See you in the next chapter of faith and inspiration.